You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate on Desert Rock FM. Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate radio show. You're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, editor of the Betoota Advocate, and Errol Parker, editor-at-large. How are you, Errol?
Always good to be back in the studio, mate. How are you today?
I'm good. Would you still call these times uncertain? Would you still call it uncertain times we're living in?
Yeah, they are always uncertain, I think, especially, with this cough going around, but I think things are getting back to normal, and I think the silly season's over, so it's time to get back to work, Clancy.
Our guest today works in, I guess you'd say, an area where you never really sleep, so there's no really coming back to work because you never really leave work, particularly over the Christmas period. We're joined today by Father Jon Owen, pastor and CEO of Wayside Chapel, one of the kind of most well-known and I guess iconic inner-city street ministries. Is that the term you'd use, Father Jon?
Yeah, that's one of the ways we can refer to it. Yeah, it's been out there since the 60s.
And how long have you been with Wayside?
Been there nearly 5 years.
If you don't mind me asking, this is for the listeners on the tractor who you're the closest thing you would have to Wayside Chapel out there in the bush would be probably the CWA. But in town there's a lot more people and there's a lot more vulnerable people. The Wayside Chapel provides support to those that you see in the street when you pull into town, when you kind of go to places like King's Cross or Woolloomooloo. You got to wonder where is the support net, if there is one, for at-risk people. Wayside Chapel does provide a semblance of the kind of support that people need down in the very bottom. And how did you find yourself in this kind of role?
Well, I don't think anyone ever sets out to do this kind of gig. Yep. You kind of stumble into it through a whole bunch of experiences. And so, part of my journey is kind of growing up and trying to fumble my way forward as a little immigrant kid, new to this country, grew up in Melbourne in the 70s and 80s, and tried my best to fit in as best I could, and tried to play footy and cricket, and I was rubbish at both of them, and that was a bit unfortunate. And then, kind of got into university and got to the point where I was thinking, what the hell do I want to actually do with my life? And the thing that I wanted to do the least was the thing I was able to do the most, which was be able to really connect with people who were doing it tough. I mean, I don't want to tell you a sob story. I mean, we didn't do it tough. When we migrated, Dad worked flipping hard to kind of set us up and establish us in this country. But what I mean by that is, just knowing what it's like to be kind of on the outer was always a big part of my DNA, and I kind of set my life to be the opposite of that, is to kind of be a bit bulletproof and rock hard. Yeah. But then I kind of noticed through, I went to university and my lecturer sat me down and said, "You're no good at this course." And I said, fair enough. It was computer science and electrical engineering.
Stop trying to be such a corporate here.
And he said, "Why don't you try something else?" And so I dropped out for a year and kind of went, instead of travelling to Europe like most of the guys are doing, I thought, I'll have a crack at, volunteering somewhere. And I started working with asylum seekers from East Timor. And then that kind of led into work with going into prisons, hanging out with some of the guys there, and just kind of realised that this is the kind of stuff I want to be doing. And it wasn't, in a standard way, like you'd think about a rev going in and kind of doing Bible studies or something. It was just hearing these guys' stories and just helping them on their way when they were on the out. So started taking guys into my house, had about 7 or 8 guys seeking asylum, including around 2000. We had a whole bunch of guys defecting from the Olympics.
Yeah, I was about to ask, boxers and the like. There was a couple I won't ask too many questions because they're probably still around somewhere in Greater Sydney, but all kinds of countries that we're visiting during the Olympics.
Absolutely. We had a ball too. So we had a federal police raid on our house at one point, and we were harbouring some Sierra Leonean athletes, Olympians, who just going back was just no option for them. Yeah. And we saw the federal police out the front of the house, and we had another house, a safe house down the road. So we thought, how do we how do we pull them off the scent? So I dressed up in the tightest lycra I could find and ran out the front pretending to be an Olympian. And thankfully, both cars followed me. We bought enough time, which was about half a block before they realised this bloke's no Olympian. And we got the guys over to the safe house because they were trialling laws around the 28-day rules around whether you hear your case in immigration detention, which is still no place. You know, we wouldn't even put our worst enemy in that kind of environment.
So I guess that's the story there. You kind of come from, Malaysian background, Sri Lankan Malaysian background, into immigrant boy Melbourne, and then you kind of fell into this work through working in the multicultural kind of asylum seekers and in that kind of space. Was religion there from the start, or was it more support work?
Yeah, a bit of both. But what started it off was a religion, but then pretty quickly, what we were thinking about was the fact is, so often we get hung up on the nouns instead of the verbs. Mm-hmm. And what it's about is really just getting out there and loving people and trying to make a difference. And then if you do that, you can't go wrong. Don't worry about all the other stuff. So always just to focus on how does this actually look like in this world? How does it play out when someone's seeking asylum? One of the most formative moments of my life was running a bit of a youth club for asylum seekers, and this 12-year-old girl, and this was about 99, before independence in East Timor. This is around June, July 99. Independence didn't happen until August, October with the referendum. And, we were saying, what are you going to do? And we did this kind of stupid exercise where you say, look, what do you hope for in the future? And for me at the time, if you asked me at 12, I would have said a yellow Walkman, right? You remember those things?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the cool cats had those.
Yeah. So I think what CD you'd put on it. Dre 2001 maybe? Or...
I'm talking cassettes, mate. Cassettes, right?
A tape deck. Yeah. I know exactly the one you're talking about too. Yeah.
I think it's probably worth a fortune.
Yeah.
And this kid just eyeballed me and she said, look, can you just help us somehow? Because they're talking about deporting us again, and I'm not ready to die yet. And I thought, shit, why is that? Oh, can we swear?
Yeah.
Sorry. Jeepers, I thought this idea of helping people, when you do it, when you start, it's usually all about your head. Think what a good bloke I am helping out, and then when that moves to your heart, you're gone for life, right? You're captured by this stuff, and
this became life and death.
Yeah, that's right. And and then all of a sudden, I didn't set out to become a political activist or anything like that. I just said what the government is doing in this scenario is clearly wrong. Yeah. So that that put me on the streets and protesting and writing letters and it wasn't because I hated the government. It was because I love this kid and this community. And that kind of really just has been the way I've always gone is, we won't make poverty history until we make it personal. It becomes a life and blood, flesh person, flesh person, what the heck does that mean? Right? you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, that's the sort of stuff, that gets me. It's not an ideological pursuit, It's, if you want to get into this gig, do you love people is the big question.
Can you give us a bit of background information on how the Wayside Chapel came to be? How did it start?
We're guessing it existed before Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah.
Well, a long, long time ago, before the cross was called Potts Point, it was kind of this weird kind of place where you had your Elizabeth Bay, Double Bay type of set alongside your Woolloomooloo, and the cross was kind of where everyone came together. Mm-hmm. And so it's always had that in its DNA. And
so
then
top end of town and the wrong side of the tracks meeting in the middle.
Bang, right there, the wharfies, and then in the Vietnam War, the wharf, the naval base,
the Americans,
that's where heroin hit the cross, and all of a sudden party time, right. And and that's kind of the genesis of the cross. The cross had a lot of empty buildings, so there were a lot of people squatting there, artists, beatniks, bohemians, but also old people. Yeah. And if you look at some of the archival footage, that's where Ted Knopf's he came from. Before he was in the cross, he was in Wilcannia. Yeah. So he was out far west, and he developed a really strong connection with the Aboriginal community out there. Yep. And then their starting of the Wayside was just going to take food to elderly people living in these squats. And then, with the Vietnam War and the hippies and the beatniks kind of hitting in, the cross became the centre of Sydney, right? Judges, lawyers, crooked cops, bikies, hippies, they all kind of came together, and they all came to this place, 24 hours a day. The worst coffee in Sydney, but it was the place you could come and talk about life.
You can still get a coffee at 4 a.m, even if it is the worst.
And, that's where so many things started out of that place from relationships with people. So the Freedom Rides left from the doorstep. of Wayside.
Really?
And then also, what else did we have starting out of there? The medically supervised injecting centres.
Yeah.
Right.
Started out of there, and that wasn't because we needed to do something politically. It was driven by saying, we're sick of picking up dead bodies.
Yeah.
Life education started out of there because once the drugs hit, these straight-laced church people were like, what's happening with these kids?
Yeah.
And then they talked about life and your potential, and had one of the rooms painted with all the stars in the universe, saying, look, we're made out of stardust here, and we have so much potential. That kind of humanity of everything. The humanity of man was kind of the big phrase back then. So that's where we Healthy Harold kicked out of the Wayside, really ultimately.
Healthy
Yeah,
Harold,
so
that's a big get. That's a big claim there.
and that's now life education, very independent to us. But where else would you want to learn about drugs but in the back of a caravan from a giraffe? Is there anything more Australian than that?
I always wondered why they chose a giraffe.
You mean the prime possum? It's a possum telling you to go to bed on prime television.
Of all the animals on Earth to choose, they chose a giraffe.
Well, I don't think aggro was around then.
No.
But like an echidna or anything.
It was pre-Olympics too, remember? That's before Sid, Ollie and Lizzie.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about that, how the church had to change their tact. It's no longer dealing with old winos on the church steps anymore. You're dealing with heroin and, I guess, visible social issues that, people weren't conditioned to at that point and weren't conditioned to seeing. Where are we at now? Is heroin still a problem in the inner city or in the outer suburbs? Is it crystal meth? What are you guys kind of dealing with on a day-to-day kind of basis?
Yeah, so this little thing called coronavirus that's been around, you may have heard of it.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's a bigger threat than everything, right?
It is responsible for the overuse of the word unprecedented, which I will blame it for forever. That kind of led to a bit of a heroin drought.
Yeah, right.
And so it created a meth boom.
Yep.
So heroin is still quite big, but backyard meth is kind of one of the biggest things going on. Part of what we do is our power lies in our proximity to the gutter. And so we'll be there and ready to love whoever walks in. And so we see there's a variety of issues that come in. Domestic violence has been a big thing. We've started to see kids back in the cross that we haven't seen for quite a while. Actually, that really a lot of youth workers and other organisations kind of left the cross about a decade ago. And we've seen a few kids dribble in. It's an inner city kind of location, so we have kids from the country.
They do have there is an issue of street kids in Sydney. Like, I guess for people who aren't familiar with Sydney town, you'd look at a movie like Two Hands, those little kids getting around for, a major part of the film. But they have the kids, you would see kids sleeping on the street in inner city Sydney?
Well, it tends to be where you end up if you drift. So we, when you grow up feeling a bit different or in a situation where your home is less safe than the streets, and that can be anywhere. So, but, what you do in a major city, this is why we see it mostly in the CBDs, is you kind of run away from home and hop on a train, and where do you end up? You end up in the central railway station of whatever the capital city is. So we had 2 kids from Dubbo last week, and they were just partying, wanting to be all big and 17, and they ended up getting robbed and everything like that. And,
first train out of here.
He said, guys, you want to get back in? But, when you're 17, mate, you're bulletproof.
Some money for a fare.
He's like, we're sweet, no worries, we got this. You go, well, you've actually been robbed and you're at the Wayside, Really? But,
Talk about a gap year.
But then you get kids who are growing up in pretty abusive households or who are gay and just not understood in their suburb or their country town. So they kind of get out of there. And unfortunately, when you drift into the CBD, you're either going to get lucky and find people who are there for you, or you're going to get dragged under pretty quick.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be those two elements kind of competing.
So what does a Wayside Chapel do to support these people that come for help?
We like to say that we're always open. We're open 365 days a year, and we're there with open arms for people who usually come to us on the first time they come to us is on the worst day of their life. We've got a big philosophy of engagement there, where we don't start with a problem. We say no one's a problem to be solved; they're a person to be met, because we don't know their background and their issue, and we won't ask. But we're there. Sometimes We just need to embrace people, make them feel safe, because usually if they've drifted into the CBD, no one ever wakes up and says, when I grow up, I want to be homeless.
Yeah.
I want to be sleeping rough. It's kind of a slow, gradual kind of fall from grace. Sometimes it's pretty quick. We have people who walk in our doors who, a few months ago were high-flying corporate executives, but the cocaine and party lifestyles kind of fallen apart pretty quick for them. So, we're just there. We've got a little cafe there that people can sit and chill. Yeah. We've got toilets and showers, and people can slowly get used to, they need to learn to trust before anything can really happen. And, we say, if someone walks away feeling met rather than worked on, it's been a good day. And so there's a whole bunch of support services out there, but primarily we're just there. We got 700 volleys, and the older the better. Yeah, it's a bit hard through Corona, but, we need people just to be those kind of loving grannies and grandpas for them.
How do you spend a lot of time in living in Mount Druitt? We've interviewed a few people from that area on the podcast. Bam Bam Tuivasa is a boxer that came out of there, a UFC fighter that came out of there. We've a lot of footballers and stuff, but it also is well known as kind of the hard knocks kind of part of Sydney on the outer. It's not particularly inner city at all. What was it like out there? Was that where you were harbouring Olympians? Was that where you were harbouring them, or was that another time in your life when you?
No, that was 10 years back. 20 years ago, we were in Melbourne in a suburb called Springvale, which is now gentrified quite a bit, but it was kind of a high Southeast Asian immigrant population, and there was a lot of heroin, a lot of gangs in that area back in Springvale. And then in the early 2000s, we moved up and lived for just over a decade in the Druitt.
Yeah, right. And you were doing the similar thing out there. I mean, from what I've read, you had a bit of a Qantas Club house. It was almost before you had Wayside, you had people coming pulling in for a couple hours, couple nights. What was it? What was the setup there?
Yeah, we just ran an open home there. Where it's as much as possible to create a safe place. Look, we love the Druitt, and you see real life. You see the best of people and you see the worst of people. And what do we say? A lot of people there tell a lot of lies, but there's not a lot of bullshit there.
Yeah.
People are straight up.
Yeah,
and I love that about it. And I raised my family there. We raised our kids there. We'll probably end up living there one day again. Just got this gig now, but it can be a rough place at times, and people need a place just to chill out, just to sit down. I think 60% of the kids are growing up in single parent households, so hospitality was a big thing for my missus, and we would cook meals and just say, just sit down and eat a meal with a knife and fork.
Yeah,
and just chill for a moment. It was also a safe space for DV's pretty high, domestic violence in that community, and just to create a little safe space for kids, kind of just to chill out. We used to have kids running amok in the place, and just to give them a bit of a break from everything else, but also give them a bit of an experience of some alternatives out there.
So again, for those on the tractor out at Mount Druitt, there's a lot of public housing out there, and as we've all kind of seen in the newspapers down in Sydney, public housing is starting to shrink. There isn't as much investment in public housing. There's public housing being torn down, and they're putting up, big towers of yuppies there where the public towers once were. What's it been like on sort of the coalface of trying to find people crisis accommodation, trying to help people into housing? Has it been easier, or is it getting harder?
Yeah, so what you're saying is absolutely is what's tracking. There's no real shared vision for public housing and the way we're going to care for people who are doing it tough, And we need to really continue to work out. There's a lot of good initiatives around reducing street sleeping, but it's always going to hit a brick wall if there's not enough housing stock out there. And we do have an opportunity now to have what's the moniker there, which is let's have a bit of a housing-led recovery. Why can't that be public housing-led recovery? We need to have beds for people. And I'm not talking about dormitories or boarding houses. I mean, they have their limits. People who work in those places do the best they can, but you're still crowding a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of issues that are going to riff off each other, and there's always going to be a bit of a volatile space. What we're seeing out in some of the public housing communities where, Sydney built these huge tracts of public housing out in Mount Druitt, but also Campbelltown, is the salt and peppering, they call it now, which is, knocking down and building private developments in the midst of it all, is it's overcrowding. in the houses that are left. And so, we saw houses where there are 20, 23 people living in the one 3-bedroom house. No one's asleep. Kids are falling behind at school because they're just trying to get something to eat or trying to sleep.
There's not even a floor to sleep on,
Correct, which is why, we ran our house kind of just come in and chill. So some kids would just come in, have a piece of toast and just sit in the corner quietly because they just needed that peace and quiet. Yeah. I mean, they're the kinds of practical things that happen that you can do to assist when there's government policies that are kind of overcrowding places.
Yeah.
And, it just creates more and more kind of issues. Kids are running the risk of falling behind.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to knock the area too. There's so many good things happening in that neighbourhood too. And there are so many good local leaders that are really standing up. And as we see, you've interviewed a few of them. Yeah. And Nakia Louie, is one of the amazing Aboriginal leaders that was born and bred in that neighbourhood. So a lot of good coming out of it too. But there's a short-sightedness in government policy.
Yeah.
And I'm not just throwing it at one side; it's all sides. There's no vision for it, and we're seeing that the overcrowding then eventually leads to homelessness, because all of a sudden, in a practical thing, it's a breakdown in the community's ability to support an individual. That's how homelessness occurs.
Do you think? I wouldn't be as harsh as saying Reaganism, in the Australian political class, but there is a big element of bootstraps amongst our leaders. I look at Morrison. I know you said you don't hate the government. You love the people you're supporting, but you look at someone like Morrison, who was publicly educated, but in the best public schools in the country, caught a bus 10 minutes to school each day, and his dad was a head of police. And he kind of looks at himself within the Liberal Party as the rose in the concrete because everyone else went to these elite private schools. And he honestly believes in his mind that he did it for himself and he came from nothing. What are you going to kind of say to that kind of attitude when you see people who have really just taken knocks every time they got their head above water? Yeah, how do you explain that, especially to the people that are making decisions on whether or not that someone's going to have a house to live in or someone's going to have a bed or a place to stay? How do you explain that actually, there are some people that the deck was marked from the moment they kind of hit the ground?
Some of the founding myths of white settlement in this country are still pretty strong and pretty hard to shake, right? And one is, the level playing field and that we're the country of the fair go. And we always pick out the exceptions here and there, to say, oh, look at this person, they made it. Yeah. But it just kind of runs roughshod over the reality is we don't start from the same point on the when the starter's gun goes, right? Yeah. And we sadly have so many people in leadership who think that the starting point they had is normative when it is clearly not.
Is Bronte Public School.
Yeah, exactly right. You think about your education and your peer group where they are now. I was lucky enough to go to a beautiful public school, and a couple of people have done really well in primary school. I went to a public school, and some really struggling. And then I was lucky enough to go to a private school, and the people in that private school weren't better, they were better connected. Yep. And there's always that opportunity, if my world falls apart, that I will just tap on the old boys network. Yeah. It just sounds horrible, doesn't it? The old boys network, but I've got a safety net.
Yeah.
Right? That is, when I look at some of the kids that I know and respect and are young adults now, half of their old boy network are dead. At 25, 30.
Yeah.
So it is clearly, when we say we start at the same point, are you really telling me you're starting at the same point for a single parent family where there are 8 kids and you're the 7th kid?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Are you telling me you're starting from the same point as them?
Yeah.
Because I can't hear that argument at all.
And the difference is one person's safety net is, I'll just get into real estate. And the other person's safety net is Wayside Chapel. So
correct, absolutely. And that kind of that bootstrap, if we just redistribute, there's enough there. What a load of crap. Try living on that, on some of those allowances and pensions that are going around. Are you kidding me?
How does Wayside sit in the greater kind of Christian community? I'm sure there's people you help that some of the more conservative ends of the Christian kind of spectrum would probably deny their existence in some capacity.
Look, sometimes we have people come in, they say, look, I get what you're doing. These are super conservative kind of religious people. And they say, but my one problem, John, is, you're not saving people. And that's usually when I show them the door and tell them to nick off.
Yeah.
And I say, I am saving you. I'm saving them from you.
Yeah.
Right? Now piss off.
Yeah.
So, we've never said we're better than anyone. We just say what we are trying to do is just to be involved in this neighbourhood that we're in. So we're here in King's Cross and we're also in Bondi Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people sleep rough. The
Yeah.
eastern suburbs of Sydney, believe it or not, is where the highest concentration of rough sleepers are in New South Wales, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean, the second
lots of nice
highest
parks.
is the Byron Bay
Yeah.
Shire.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
so we...
Is that gentrification? People been priced out on the spot, or people are kind of driven towards nicer areas, or what is the reason for that?
Look, there are a few factors at play,
Yeah.
but the thing we don't talk about is caravan parks. They're the kind of place between the house and the street,
Yeah.
and they're actually they're keeping a lot of people from complete abject homelessness. But there are some pretty rough stuff goes on in some of those caravan parks out there, and people kind of drift around, and then if you're looking for a bit of support, you'd be silly not to stay in a neighbourhood where people are more affluent.
Yeah.
But also, I think people want
They're
to...
much safer, aren't they, really?
And people want to help.
Yeah.
If I was homeless, I'd probably be out in Bondi Beach rather than Blacktown.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Yeah,
It just tracks.
It's like San Francisco, Venice Beach, all those kind of towns in America that have giant homeless populations. They never have winters. That's the big thing, too.
Yeah, and that's a big... And
Yeah.
there is a migration north
Yep.
as well through the colder months.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is just a natural... you get your train ticket a year to get as far north as you can and go up there and stay where it's a bit warmer, where you're not going to freeze to death as well. So it just kind of tracks there. And I tap my hat off to people who do that.
What do you think of the... in terms of that nice edge of between stable kind of middle-class existence and homelessness it is a nice edge. I mean, there was one example I saw back when everyone was talking about the eastern suburbs during those by-elections they all had down there, and Phelps got in. They were talking about homelessness, and it was the first time I would have ever considered it, but they found an 80-something-year-old woman sleeping in her car because her and her husband had been renting their whole lives in the same place, and he died, and the rent stopped getting paid. And then all of a sudden, never considered aged care and didn't have the means for it. How often do you see that where someone's just more so, they're shocked by the new living arrangement of being homeless, but they're just shocked that they'd never thought that they could be homeless?
That line between housed and homeless
Yeah.
is a lot thinner than we would like to think.
Yeah.
There was a report recently where they said, the average Aussie family has 8 weeks savings in the bank. Right, that's pretty skinny.
Yeah.
And we think about rents or mortgages that are just so exorbitant. You want to live in this anywhere within 30, 40 clicks of this CBD.
Yeah.
It costs a fortune. And, we very easily, can be, through a tragedy like an episode of mental illness or some sort of crisis entering your life, that things can pretty quickly spiral out of control. And then there's a lot of shame associated with that, which is why a lot of women end up on the streets through a process of sleeping in the car, and then eventually the car breaks down and things kind of fall apart, and then they end up on the streets. So, we see so often, we saw someone who was ostensibly a soccer mum end up sleeping in a car with the kids within 6 weeks. There was a tragedy in the family. Dad died, kind of in the grief, it all kind of fell apart. And, it was like, you would never have imagined that,
Cookie
let's say it's
cutter,
August.
white
I mean,
picket
even
fence.
through coronavirus, we had someone who came in to our centre at Bondi Beach, who high-flying consultant with a couple of kids, and all of a sudden the work just stopped in consultancy, and within 2 months, no money, no food, Christmas was coming up, and it was just like, I supported you. Right, I'm a supporter of Wayside, and now I'm asking for support.
Yeah.
Within 2 months.
Wow. You find supporters. I mean, I'll go back to the idea of supporting Wayside Chapel. You have a community of high flyers as well. It's because it is, I guess, so prevalent to inner city It's got a bit of a profile. You do have your, as I mentioned before, Turnbulls, David Wenham, people like that have known about Wayside. Maybe they've lived in the Cross at some point and kind of been around it. How do you keep those, like, your job isn't, you're not salesman either, how do you kind of keep that support? You do campaigns, you run campaigns, how do you kind of keep that philanthropy coming in?
Yeah. It's not about being a Robin Hood type of arrangement here. It's about trying to capture people's hearts, and most people get it. Most people love it too. We share the same patch of dirt as other people, and I think when people come into our doors, and we invite everyone to come and check us out, is we're not a crisis centre, we're a community centre. And the biggest issue that I think people are facing is not a lack of cash, it's loneliness. There's that disconnection, and that goes just as equally for someone whose world's fallen apart, as well as for someone who is living in their fine and fancy apartment in Potts Point, but their kids don't want to spend any time with them and are just waiting for them to die for their inheritance. And so, there's that kind of...
That's pretty prevalent too in the East, right?
Absolutely, right?
Especially in Potts Point too. I mean, there's lots of maiden aunts up in those big buildings.
Yeah.
We have people who... our volunteers have actually found it harder through shutdown and some of our punters who have been on the streets. Because it's saying, this is who I am. This is where I come and I'm loved, and that 3 hours of being sworn at is the highlight of my week, right? Because again, it's that kind of that real life, and people treat you as not as what your title or your station is in life. It's, are you a good person? And that's kind of what we do. And so, but we also run campaigns too. So we've got Valentine's Day coming up. And
what's the plan there? What's the Valentine's Day?
We've got a bit of fun. We say, all the Wayside, all we do is it's about love. Love is at the centre of it. We say, think about it. Nothing says I love you like a clean pair of undies for someone who slept rough for the night. And look, I say Valentine's Day for most of us is designed to try and get someone's undies off. Well, instead, how about we help them get them on, right? Put them on a homeless person. And someone who's doing it tough. And if people, log on and check out the Wayside Chapel website, you'll see the link to the Valentine's Day campaign. And if you send us in the money, we'll send your loved one or your secret admirer a little card that says, for Valentine's Day this year, I bought a pair of undies for someone else.
Oh, that's a great initiative for anyone listening who wants to help out. You've heard all about Wayside Chapel today, but that is waysidechapel.org.au/Valentines. It's a good cause. They've obviously just come off a big couple months with Christmas and all the support they've provided
on the back of a big year, really.
Yeah, it's
an unprecedented year.
and we're in the middle of a year where we just don't know what's going to happen, right? It feels a bit, I think the best adjective is polypy. It feels good and all of a sudden, whoop, there's more pain.
Well, the government's about to cut the cord in a month's time, so who knows what's going to happen there.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the big worry, the big unknown too. And we're ready, we're there, but we're just saying who knows what's going to come next. International travel's not going to be there. International students aren't going to be there. Kids, if you're studying in high school, never been a better time to get into the university course of your dreams.
There's not going to be. You're not going to be competing with too many hyper academics from Beijing in the next couple of years in university. I don't think so. Maybe
no.
Not.
And I think we've got some strange. We have to draw a line somewhere, but the lines that are drawn just look stranger and stranger. Right? I think Darwin Uni just chartered a flight and brought in students. You think that makes sense, right? And tell you what, there's only one way this virus gets into Australia, right? And that's through the hotel quarantine system, right? We need to double the pay of every quarantine worker so they're not going and doing Uber driving after their shifts. Right? Seriously, the biggest economic risk to this country now is the hotel quarantine system. triple their wages, right?
Yeah, and perhaps maybe don't run it out of hotels in the centre of the CBD. That's also a good idea.
Yeah.
We're catching the train home.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
And being
the way,
like-
I think you can go anywhere. It's just let's make it a steel ring fence around that place, right? And it's not that hard to do, but let's incentivise it and let's do better by our aged care workers as well.
Toowoomba Wellcamp Airport waiting there, mate. They've got mining accommodation. They're ready to go. Just give them the word, ScoMo.
So just before we go, what is the best way for people to support the Wayside Chapel who are listening at home, who might not be from Sydney, who...
Yeah, great. Well, normally I'd say come in, visit us, but probably stay at home through this time. And look, log on, get to check out the Valentine's Day appeal. But I send a weekly little note out where I kind of write about what's going on in the community and kind of get into the rhythm of that. And, we're all about trying to help people go back onto that journey of feeling human again. Because that's, and for that that means for people who think they're more than human, we knock them down a few pegs. We don't. It's when they walk into the place and they realise,
the world will knock them down a few pegs when they see what's going on the
But then for those who feel less than, we say, no, actually, you're loved and you're somebody's son and you're somebody's daughter and you've got a purpose in life too. So, get involved, get familiar with our ethos, and then when things become a little bit easier to move around, come and visit, come and say good day, come and have a cuppa with me. I'll shout you a terrible coffee, and I'll show you around the place. And you just
international roast. What are we dealing with here?
A gunpowder grey, mate. That's my my dad's brand of choice. International roast.
Mine too.
Well, thank you for joining us, Father Jon. You're doing. I wouldn't say God's work. I think you're doing the work that we all should be doing on a day-to-day basis as members of a community, wherever we're in the bush or in the city. But it's good to know that there are people, banging the drum and providing support to those who, the rest of us forgot. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks for coming in.